3D. Rated R.
This is Dredd. Judge.
Betray the city.
The sentence is done.
Yeah.
Perps were uncooperative.
What if one of the most brutal dystopian movies was actually hiding some crazy facts? Today, we are diving into Dredd 2012. The action, the story, and the facts you probably never knew. Now, this is Kali Facts. Let's enter Mega City 1. Dread is a 2012 sci fi action movie directed by Pete Travis and written and produced by Alex Garland. The movie is based on the Judge Dredd comic from 2000 AD, featuring the character created by John Wagner and Carlos Esquerra. Karl Urban plays Judge Dredd, a tough law enforcer who has the power to be the judge, jury, and executioner all at once. He lives and works in a huge messed up city called Mega City 1, which sits in a post apocalyptic wasteland. Dredd and his rookie partner, Judge Anderson, played by Olivia Thirlby, are sent into a massive 200-story apartment building to bring some order back. But things get seriously crazy when they have to deal with the building's dangerous drug lord, Mama, played by Lena Headey. Alex Garland started working on the script back in 2006. However, the development of a brand new Judge Dredd movie, completely separate from the 1995 movie Judge Dredd, wasn't officially announced until December 2008. The movie was produced by the British studio DNA Films. When production finally kicked off, the team started filming in November 2010 and used 3D cameras throughout the entire shoot. The movie was filmed using real sets and actual locations in Cape Town and Johannesburg. Dredd hit theaters in the United Kingdom on September 7, 2012, and was released worldwide on September  21. Overall, critics had a pretty positive reaction to the movie, especially when it came to the visual effects, the cast, and the intense action scenes. However, some people criticized the movie for being extremely violent and felt that it didn't include enough of the dark satire and humor found in the original comic. Even though critics liked the movie, it didn't make a huge amount of money at the box office. It earned a little over $41 million worldwide against a production budget estimated to be somewhere between $30 million and $45 million. Because the movie didn't make enough money in theaters, a sequel seemed pretty unlikely. Still, the movie found a strong fan base after its theatrical run. Home media sales and continued support from fans, along with efforts backed by 2000 AD publisher Rebellion Developments, have kept the possibility of a second Dredd movie alive. In the year 2080, the future United States has become a radioactive wasteland known as the Cursed Earth. On the East Coast sits Mega City 1, a massive and violent city packed with around 800 million people. The city deals with about 17,000 crimes every single day. Outside the city's walls, there's nothing but a huge empty desert. Mega City 1 is basically a giant cursed city stretching all the way from Boston to Washington, D.C. It's covered by an endless landscape of concrete and packed with massive structures like mega blocks and mega highways. Things are getting even worse because a new and highly addictive drug called slow mo has hit the streets. This drug slows down the user's perception of time to just 1% of normal speed, making everything around them seem incredibly slow. The city is slowly falling apart under its own massive size and problems. Regular citizens are terrified of the gangs that control entire areas through guns, fear, and brutal violence. The only real force keeping the city from completely falling apart is the judges who work out of the Hall of Justice. These judges have the power to act as judge, jury, and executioner. Pretty much the entire city is constantly watched through huge networks of video cameras and audio feeds. An advanced AI system monitors all this information, identifies criminals and violent situations, and directs the judges toward the areas where they are needed most. Judge Dredd is shown as a seriously tough guy, but he's also extremely calm and professional. He doesn't negotiate with criminals, stays cool during hostage situations, and has incredible aim. His shooting skills allow him to take down criminals while doing everything he can to avoid hurting innocent people caught in the middle. Judge Dredd, played by Karl Urban, is given a new assignment by the chief judge, played by Raki Ayola. His job is to evaluate a rookie named Cassandra Anderson, played by Olivia Thirlby. Anderson is a powerful psychic who can read people's minds, but she failed the normal requirements to become a judge. She actually failed the aptitude tests when she was just 9 years old. Anderson became an orphan after losing both of her parents when she was 7. She was later allowed to enter the Judge Academy through special instructions. Even while she was at the academy, she was considered a borderline candidate. When she took her final test, she scored just 3 percentile points below the passing mark. However, the chief judge believes Anderson has something that could be incredibly useful in the judge's losing battle against crime. Her psychic abilities are far stronger than anything the Academy has ever seen. Anderson can use her powers to enter the minds of people around her and see their memories and thoughts. Dredd's job is to take Anderson into the field, test her abilities in a real situation, and then give the chief judge a final report. Before they start, Dredd makes the rules very clear. If Anderson disobeys orders, gives someone the wrong sentence, or gets disarmed, she automatically fails the evaluation. The situation in the city is already extremely dangerous. One out of every five judges doesn't even survive their first day on the job. Around 12 serious crimes are reported every minute, while the Hall of Justice only has enough resources to respond to about 6% of those crimes. Dredd and Anderson's first major assignment takes them to Peach Trees, a massive 200-story slum tower filled with around 75,000 residents. The building has a shocking 96% unemployment rate and the highest crime rate in Sector 13. Half of the residential floors are officially classified as slums. The tower is controlled by a dangerous drug lord named Madeline Madrigal, played by Lena Headey. She is better known by her nickname Mama. Before becoming a powerful crime boss, Mama was a prostitute working in the S9 Pleasure District. Her former pimp once attacked her and cut her face. Mama eventually got revenge by brutally attacking him with her teeth, effectively destroying him and taking control of his business. After that, she never looked back. A few years before the events of the movie, Mama arrived at Peach Trees and wiped out the three gangs that were operating inside the building. After taking out the competition, she became the undisputed boss of the entire tower and gained control over all 200 floors. At the beginning of the story, Mama has three former drug dealers killed in a brutal way. Her men skin them alive, pump them full of slow mo, and then throw them down the giant atrium from the top floor. Dredd and Anderson are sent to investigate the murders. They discover a drug operation inside the building and decide to raid it. The three victims are connected to level 39, so the judges head there to investigate. Anderson isn't wearing her helmet because the equipment could interfere with her powerful psychic abilities. During the investigation, Dredd and Anderson arrest a thug named Kay, played by Wood Harris. Anderson uses her psychic powers to look into Kay's mind and discovers that he was the person who carried out the execution of the three drug dealers. Dredd decides to take Kay back for questioning, but Mama isn't about to let that happen. Her people take control of the building's security room and completely lock down Peach Trees. They activate the massive blast shields, pretending that the building is going through a security test. The lockdown traps Dredd, Anderson, and everyone else inside the tower. It also stops the judges from leaving or calling for outside help. Mama gives her people one simple order: kill Dredd and Anderson. The two judges now have to fight their way through dozens of heavily armed gang members. As they reach the 76th floor, Mama and her crew launch a massive attack using powerful Vulcan cannons. The weapons tear through the building's walls and kill a large number of innocent residents. Dredd and Anderson manage to break through an outside wall and finally get a chance to call for backup. Meanwhile, Mama sends one of her trusted men, Caleb, played by Warwick Greer, to make sure the judges are dead. Caleb eventually runs into Dredd and Anderson. But Dredd decides to send a message. He grabs Caleb and throws him off the tower right in front of Mama and her people. Mama is now furious. Dredd is also angry because so many innocent people were killed during Mama's attack. He beats Kay and demands information, eventually realizing that Mama is desperate to stop him from taking Kay in for interrogation. Anderson steps in and uses her psychic abilities to read Kay's mind. She discovers something huge. Peach Trees isn't just a drug den. The entire building is actually the center of the production and distribution of slow mo. Anderson suggests that they hide somewhere inside the tower and wait for backup to arrive. But Dredd has other plans. He decides they need to keep moving upward and go directly after Mama Dredd's backup eventually arrives. Judge's Vault, played by Daniel Hadebe, and Guthrie, played by Francis Chuler, respond to his emergency call. However, Mama's computer expert, played by Domhnall Gleeson, tricks them into believing the emergency call is actually part of the building's security drill. Because of this, they are denied entry. Things get even worse when two armed teenagers confront Dredd and Anderson. During the chaos, Kay manages to disarm Anderson and overpower her. He then escapes with Anderson as his hostage and takes her straight to Mama's headquarters on the top floor. While Dredd continues making his way through the tower, Mama brings in some extra help. She contacts four corrupt judges: Lex, played by Langley Kirkwood; Kaplan, played by Michelle Levin; Chan, played by Carl Fanning; and Alvarez, played by Edwin Perry. The four corrupt judges relieve Walt and Guthrie from duty and gain access to the building. Dredd eventually runs into Judge Chan. Something immediately feels off. Dredd notices that Chan doesn't even ask about Anderson or seem concerned about where she is. Dredd realizes that something isn't right. Chan knows that Dredd has figured him out, so he attacks. Dredd fights back and kills him. Meanwhile, Kay tries to kill Anderson using her own judge weapon. But there's one big problem. The pistol has a DNA scanner. Since Kay isn't Anderson, the weapon doesn't recognize him as the authorized user. The gun activates its security system and blows Kay's arm off. Anderson manages to escape. Later, she runs into another corrupt Judge Kaplan. Anderson uses her psychic powers to enter Kaplan's mind and discovers the truth about her. Anderson then kills her. At another part of the building, Dredd takes down Alvarez. However, he suddenly runs out of ammunition. That's when Lex gets the upper hand and shoots Dredd in the stomach. Lex moves in to finish Dredd off, but Dredd manages to stall him long enough. Just when Lex is about to kill him, Anderson arrives and takes Lex out. Now Dredd and Anderson are finally getting close to Mama. The two judges manage to get the access code to Mama's apartment from her computer expert. They make their way to the top floor and confront her. But Mama has one final trick up her sleeve. She tells Dredd that if she dies, a device attached to her wrist will activate explosives planted throughout the top floors of the building. If the explosives go off, the entire top section of peach trees will be destroyed. Dredd thinks about it and realizes there's a problem with Mama's plan. The signal from her wrist detonator won't be strong enough to reach the explosives if she's taken down to the ground floor. So Dredd comes up with a brutal solution. He forces Mama to take slow mo, slowing her perception of time down to almost nothing. Then he takes her to the ground floor where the detonator can't reach the explosives. Finally, Dredd throws Mama down the massive atrium, sending her to her death. With Mama finally gone and the situation under control, Anderson believes she has failed her evaluation. After all, she was disarmed by K, which was one of the automatic failure conditions Dredd warned her about. She accepts that she didn't make the cut and prepares to leave. The chief judge later asks Dredd how Anderson performed during her evaluation. Dredd simply tells her that Anderson passed. Karl Urban's selection as Judge Dredd represented a deliberate pivot from the expectations that typically govern comic book adaptations. Producers at DNA Films, working with a constrained budget that ultimately settled in the 30–45 million range, understood that the helmet could never come off. That contractual and creative non negotiable eliminated the possibility of casting a conventional movie star whose face would be expected to sell the film. Urban, already known for supporting turns in the Lord of the Rings trilogy and the 2009 Star Trek reboot, approached the producers himself after reading Alex Garland's screenplay. He had grown up with the 2000 AD comics and immediately recognized that the script intended a faithful, unapologetic rendering of the character rather than another attempt at Hollywood accessibility. Meetings in Los Angeles confirmed mutual alignment. The producers needed an actor comfortable with near total facial obscurity, and Urban needed assurance that the tone would remain gritty, violent, and true to John Wagner and Carlos Esquera's creation. Physical preparation occupied roughly 14 weeks of intensive gym work. Urban trained twice daily, consumed 6 or 7 meals, and carried suitcases of food while promoting another film internationally. The goal was not merely aesthetic bulk, but functional strength sufficient for the combat sequences and the weight of the practical costume. Once on location in Cape Town, he began wearing the full leather uniform and helmet throughout pre production days, so that movement limitations became second nature. An ex British military team conducted a 2.5 week boot camp covering tactical movement, door breaching, and arrest procedures. Airsoft replicas of the lawgiver were issued so that the cast could rehearse live fire choreography without blank firing weapons on the practical sets. Urban further insisted on riding the Lawmaster motorcycle himself for several sequences rather than relegating the work to stunt doubles, a choice that required additional technical training but preserved visual continuity between close ups and action plates. Vocal characterization proved equally exacting. Research through stacks of comic issues yielded a single descriptive phrase. Dredd's voice sounded like a saw cutting through bone. Urban developed a rasp that he maintained for the entire shoot, a sustained physical effort that left his throat strained. Because the helmet removed eye acting from the performance toolkit, every emotional register had to be conveyed through posture, gait, jaw tension, and the controlled violence of the voice. The result is a performance that feels monolithic yet never static. Small shifts in shoulder angle or the cadence of a one liner register as significant character beats within the film's compressed timeline. Olivia Thirlby's casting as Cassandra Anderson followed a more conventional audition path and yet still required exceptional commitment. She received the script while already working in South Africa and submitted multiple self tapes before flying out for a formal screen test. The role demanded a performer who could project both physical competence and internal complexity. Anderson is a mutant psychic who failed the standard judge entrance exams yet was granted a field assessment because of her rare abilities. Thirlby, therefore, had to embody a character whose moral compass operates in perpetual gray while still functioning as a credible partner to the black and white absolutism of Dredd. Combat training mirrored Urban's regimen. Thirlby learned weapons handling, tactical movement, and a roundhouse kick designed to sell physical authority in leather and body armor. She also studied the comics after arrival, receiving a thick binder of source material that informed but did not override the specific incarnation Garland had written. The character's blonde bob required constant maintenance. Roots were redyed every 9 days to keep the comic accurate silhouette intact under the harsh Cape Town sun and practical lighting. Thirlby has spoken of the appeal of playing an action heroine who is neither a pure ingenue nor a one note tough, noting that Anderson's psychic insight forces her into ethical territory Dredd never occupies. The performance balances vulnerability and steel, particularly in the interrogation sequences where Anderson's ability to read minds becomes both a tactical asset and a moral burden. Lena Headey's engagement as Madeline Mama Madrigal altered the character from the page. Early drafts and concept art imagined an older, heavily scarred, obese woman in her late 50s or 60s. Hattie, then in her late 30s, lobbied for the part with such intensity that Garland rewrote the role around her. The result is a middle aged former prostitute who has clawed her way to absolute control of peach trees through calculated brutality and the distribution of slow mo. Hattie's preparation included extensive tattoo work. Many of the designs visible on screen were temporary but mapped carefully to suggest years of self inflicted and punitive marking. Hair was cut short and uneven. A prominent facial scar was applied daily. Inspiration for the performance came from punk icon Patti Smith, channeling a raw unfiltered defiance rather than theatrical villainy. Headey described Mama as a great white shark waiting for something larger to end her existence, an addict already dead in spirit, yet still capable of extreme violence. The portrayal avoids cartoonish excess. Mama's menace lies in the casual way she orders massacres and the absolute conviction that the tower is hers by right of conquest. Supporting actors who shared scenes with her have noted the intensity of her focus, which raised the stakes of every confrontation. The casting also solved a practical problem. An older, heavier Mama would have required more extensive prosthetics and limited physical mobility in the action sequences that culminate on the top floors. Wood Harris entered the ensemble as K. Mama's primary enforcer and the first major target of the judge's investigation. Harris brought a grounded realism drawn from earlier work in ensemble dramas. He approached Kay not as a pure antagonist, but as a man who views the judges as an occupying force no more legitimate than the gangs they suppress. That internal justification allowed Harris to play the character with a cold professionalism rather than cartoon malevolence. The physical demands of the role included extended sequences of restraint, interrogation, and eventual confrontation, all of which required coordination with Urban and Thirlby's combat training. Domhnall Gleeson's casting as the unnamed clan techie introduced a different tonal register. Gleeson, still relatively early in his feature career, after supporting turns in the Harry Potter films, played a reluctant computer specialist whose eyes had been surgically replaced with cybernetic implants after Mama gouged them out with her thumbs. The role is largely reactive, fear, compliance, and momentary flashes of conscience. Yet Gleason's performance supplies the film's only sustained note of pity. When Anderson reads his mind, the audience learns the full extent of the torture that bound him to the clan. The decision to release him rather than execute him becomes a critical test of Anderson's judgment and one of the few moments where the film allows moral ambiguity to override Dredd's absolute code. Subfitting judges were drawn largely from South African talent, reflecting the production's base in Cape Town. Langley Kirkwood portrayed the corrupt Judge Lex with a lean, predatory efficiency. Edwin Perry, Carl Fanning, and Michelle Levin filled out the remaining dirty judges, Alvarez, Chan, and Kaplan, each given distinct physical presence and brief but decisive action beats. Rocky Ayola appeared as the chief judge, delivering the institutional voice that frames the entire assessment of Anderson. Diobia Opare played the Peach Tree's Medic TJ, a civilian caught between the judge and the gang, while Warwick Greer embodied Caleb, Mama's personal enforcer. Local casting calls filled smaller speaking parts and background roles. Junior Singo and Luke Tyler as the two-armed teenagers who briefly challenge Dredd Jason Cope as the pup executed in the opening sequence. Joe Waz as Big Joe, and numerous uncredited residents, control operators, and slow-mo users. Casting director Sarah Halley Finn, Denton Douglas, and Kate Dowd managed the dual requirements of international leads and authentic local texture. Douglas had previously worked on District 9, another Cape Town production that blended practical effects with social realism and brought similar instincts to the mega city one environment. Open Call sought child actors for brief but memorable moments, skater girls for atmospheric street scenes, and adult performers with clear, authoritative voices for control room and medical roles. The production's decision to shoot almost entirely on practical sets and locations rather than green screen stages meant that every background face needed to feel lived in and credible under Anthony Dodd Mantle's high contrast 3D cinematography. Preparation extended beyond the principals. The entire speaking cast underwent weapons familiarization so that lawgiver handling and tactile movement remained consistent. Costume fittings for the judge uniforms emphasized bulk and restriction. Actors learned to adjust their center of gravity and breathing accordingly. For the gang members, wardrobe and makeup departments created a visual hierarchy of status through layers of scavenged clothing, homemade armor, and varying degrees of slow mo induced physical deterioration. The result is a world that feels densely populated even when the frame is occupied by only two or three speaking characters. The decision to keep Dredd's face hidden forced a redistribution of emotional labor across the ensemble. Thirlby carries the bulk of audience identification. Headey supplies the opposing force of chaotic will. Harris, Gleason, and the supporting judges provide gradations of loyalty, fear, and corruption. Urban's performance functions as the fixed point around which these other energies orbit. That architectural choice in casting, anchoring the film with an actor willing to disappear into silhouette and voice, allowed the surrounding performances greater freedom to explore moral complexity without ever diluting the central iconography of the judge. Physical training regimens were coordinated so that fight choreography could be photographed in long, unbroken takes whenever possible. The military advisors emphasized economy of movement. Every gesture in the helmet had to read clearly through the limited aperture of the visor. Urban's insistence on performing motorcycle work himself eliminated the visual discontinuity that sometimes arises when a stunt double's posture differs from the principal's. Thirlby's combat preparation enabled Anderson to participate in the same kinetic sequences rather than remaining a purely psychic observer. Headey's physical commitment to mama scars and tattoos ensured that the character's history remained visible even in wide shots of the tower's upper levels. The South African supporting cast brought an unforced authenticity to the lower floors of Peach Trees. Many of the smaller roles were filled by performers with theater backgrounds or previous work in local film and television, allowing naturalistic delivery under the pressure of complex camera moves and practical effects. The production's open casting process also captured a range of ages, body types, and ethnic backgrounds that mirror the comics' depiction of Megacity 1 as a polyglot, overcrowded environment rather than a homogenized future. Gleason's clan techie occupies a unique space within this ensemble. The character's cybernetic eyes required careful practical makeup and lighting so that the implants registered as functional rather than purely decorative. The performance itself is one of constrained physicality, hunched posture, rapid eye movements behind the artificial lenses, and a voice that rarely rises above a murmur. When Anderson's psychic interrogation reveals the torture that created those eyes, the audience receives the film's clearest statement about the human cost of Mama's empire. The decision to spare the techie becomes a quiet but decisive character moment for Anderson and a subtle challenge to Dredd's binary worldview. Harris's K functions as the narrative catalyst who draws the judges into the tower and then becomes the prize Mama will destroy the building to protect. The performance balances professional calm with sudden eruptions of violence, never tipping into caricature. In the interrogation sequences, Harris and Urban share the frame in tight, high contrast compositions that emphasize the power differential while still allowing K's private rationalizations to register. The eventual fate of the character underscores the film's refusal to grant easy redemption or prolonged suffering. Judgment is swift and final. The corrupt judges, Lex, Kaplan, Chan, and Alvarez, were cast to present a credible internal threat rather than cartoon traitors. Kirkwood's Lex, in particular, carries the physical authority of a seasoned street judge while revealing the moral rot that has compromised the institution. Their brief appearance mid film raises the stakes without requiring extensive backstory. The audience understands immediately that the system itself is not immune to the corruption it policies. Iola's chief judge, appearing only in the framing sequences, supplies the institutional voice that both initiates Anderson's assessment and ultimately accepts Dredd's final judgment of it. Costume and makeup departments worked in close coordination with the casting choices. Judge uniforms were tailored to each performer's frame so that the silhouette remained consistent while still accommodating the physical differences between Urban, Thirlby, and the supporting judges. Gang members received individualized weathering and injury makeup that suggested long-term exposure to slow-mo and the tower's violent hierarchy. Headey's mama tattoos were applied in layers that could survive the physical demands of the final sequences while remaining legible in both close-up and wide shots. The cumulative effect of these casting decisions is a film whose human scale remains intimate even as the architecture of peach trees expands to 200 stories. Every major role was filled by an actor capable of carrying significant dramatic weight within limited screen time. Urban's willingness to disappear into the helmet freed the surrounding performances to explore the ethical gray zones that the comic itself has always contained. Thirlby Anderson supplies the audience moral and emotional entry point without ever softening the film's commitment to ultraviolence. Hattie's Ma anchors the antagonistic force in a performance of controlled ferocity rather than theatrical excess. The supporting ensemble, drawn from both international and local talent pools, populates the tower with faces that feel specific rather than generic. Preparation across the company emphasized practical skill over digital augmentation. Actors learned to move, fight, and speak within the physical constraints of their costumes and the practical sets. The result is a body of performances that remain grounded even when the narrative escalates into large scale destruction. The casting of Dredd therefore stands as a model of how constraints, budget, the helmet, the decision to shoot in South Africa can be converted into creative advantages when the right performers are matched to the material. Each actor brought a precise understanding of their character's function within the larger machine of Mega City One Justice. And the film's enduring reputation rests in no small part on the clarity and the commitment of those choices. Dread 2012. Production, release, and reception, production, development, and pre production. The road to Dread began years before cameras ever rolled. Screenwriter Alex Garland started developing material based on the Judge Dredd comic strip as early as 2006, working on the project on and off while he was also occupied with other writing commitments. It wasn't until the 20th of December 2008 that the wider industry press learned a new adaptation was actually in motion, one explicitly conceived as unrelated to the poorly received 1995 Sylvester Stallone vehicle. The British outfit DNA Films took on production duties and struck a partnership with the sales agency IM Global to handle worldwide distribution rights, a relationship that would prove central to how the film was eventually financed and sold to international markets. Momentum built through 2010. By May of that year, IM Global and its parent company, Reliance Big Pictures, had agreed to co finance the picture as a 3D production carrying a budget of roughly $45 million, with a plan to begin shooting in Johannesburg, South Africa, before the year was out. Around the same time, Pete Travis was confirmed as director, joining Garland, Andrew MacDonald, and Alan Reich as producers. Interestingly, the directing job had first been offered to Duncan Jones, who ultimately passed. In a 2010 interview, Jones explained that the tone he wanted to bring to the material, something odd, dark, and comic all at once, simply didn't align with the direction Garland's script had already taken. By September 2010, the project had settled on the title it would carry to release, simply Dread, dropping any reference to Judge in the title to distinguish it clearly from its predecessor. Pre-production formally got underway on the 23rd August 2010 at Cape Town Film Studios in South Africa. Casting news arrived in quick succession that summer. At San Diego Comic Con in July 2010, Karl Urban confirmed he had been offered the lead role, and by the 18th of August, it was reported he had officially accepted. The following month, Olivia Thirlby was announced as Cassandra Anderson, Dredd's psychic rookie partner. That same September, at the Toronto International Film Festival, the film generated roughly $30 million in worldwide pre sales, securing distribution deals covering around 90% of theatrical markets. Among them, a $7 million agreement with the British distributor Entertainment Film Distributors. North American distribution rights followed on the 2nd of November 2010 when Lionsgate signed on. Lena Headey completed the film's central quartet of stars in January 2011, taking on the role of the drug lord Mama. Throughout development, Judge Dredd co-creator John Wagner served as a consultant, later confirming publicly that the new film was conceived as a fresh adaptation of the comic rather than any kind of remake of the Stallone film. Garland's writing process for the script had a long and winding history. He began working on Dredd during the post-production phase of Sunshine, another of his screenwriting credits, and finished a first draft while serving as an executive producer on the set of 28 Weeks Later. That early draft centered on one of the comic's most infamous villains, the undead Judge Death, and Garland has described it as an attempt to riff on the broader mechanics of the judge system itself. He eventually concluded the approach didn't work. It demanded too much prior audience knowledge of a judge system that the film hadn't yet had the chance to establish, and the material tipped too far into the surreal and the extreme. That realization pushed him toward a simpler, more grounded story. He weighed adapting some of the comic's best known long form storylines, including Democracy from 1986 and Origins from 2006, but ultimately chose to sidestep those sprawling narratives in favor of a tighter day in the life structure, following Dredd carrying out his duties as a street level enforcer in the dystopian sprawl of Mega City 1. Garland was also deliberate about how much the title character himself would be allowed to change over the course of the story. He wanted to mirror the way the comics Dread evolves only very gradually, described in terms of glacial movement, where meaningful shifts become visible only when measured over a long span of time. He aimed for Dredd to make a firm declaration early in the film that he would go on to quietly contradict by the end without any single dramatic epiphany driving the change. To balance that restraint, Garland intentionally gave the more conventional arc of growth and transformation to Anderson instead, letting her character carry the emotional through line that Dredd's stoicism couldn't. The choice of setting mattered just as much to Garland as the plot mechanics. He conceived of the Peach Trees Tower block as something like a self contained micro city state a place where people could live out entire lives and die without ever needing to leave the building. He felt this also honored a note from Wagner that any future vision of Megacity 1 should still feel tethered to recognizable modern patterns of urban living rather than pure science fiction spectacle. The tower's name itself has a personal origin. Garland named it after a restaurant called the Peach Tree in Shrewsbury, England, the town where he had first sat down with Wagner. Budget realities also shaped what made it to screen. The film's resources limited how much of the comic's wider stranger iconography, robots, aliens, and other exotic elements of Mega City 1 could be represented on screen. Throughout the writing and shooting process, Garland kept sending pages to Wagner, who would revise dialogue, and Urban would then further adjust lines during his own performance, creating a layered collaborative pipeline between comic creator, screenwriter, and lead actor. Character and costume design received similarly careful attention. The filmmakers wanted Urban's Dredd to look lean and fast, closer to a boxer's build than the exaggeratedly bulky, steroid enhanced physique sometimes associated with the character. His uniform was also reworked from its comic page source. The ornate eagle statuette, traditionally mounted on the shoulder pad, was removed to emphasize function over decoration and to lend the costume a greater sense of plausibility. Garland argued that a scrupulously faithful recreation of the comic uniform would have left Dredd dangerously underprotected in the field, reasoning that a frontline law enforcer needed gear that actually looked like it could stop a blade or a bullet. In keeping with the source material, the production also committed to never showing Dredd's face beyond his mouth and chin, and his helmet stays on for the entire runtime. Urban embraced this constraint, comparing it to classic westerns where the audience never needs to know a gunslinger's real name for the character to register as iconic. Dredd's signature sidearm, the Lawgiver, was built as a genuinely functional prop firearm engineered around a 9 mm firing platform, capable of switching between automatic and semi automatic fire to match different moments in the script. His motorcycle, the Lawmaster, was similarly grounded in a real rideable vehicle, a modified 500cc motorcycle fitted with an oversized fairing, mounted machine guns, an extended wheelbase, and the largest tires the production could make functional. Urban insisted on riding the bike himself for the film's stunts rather than relying on green screen substitution. Wagner, drawing on the troubled production history of the 1995 film, noted that its attempt to build a motorcycle that literally replicated the comic's proportions had failed because the tires were simply too large to allow the bike to steer, a cautionary tale the new production was determined not to repeat. Perhaps the most distinctive visual signature of the whole film, the slow mo sequences depicting the effects of the fictional narcotic of the same name, had its roots even earlier than principal photography. Garland and visual effects supervisor John Thumb began experimenting with the concept back in 2009 during the filming of Never Let Me Go. Their early tests were aimed at replicating the visual sensation of hallucinogenic drugs, and they spent considerable time gauging exactly how long such an effect could hold the screen before it started pulling the audience out of the story or action. That process of refinement continued all the way through to the end of post production, with ongoing adjustments to color, saturation, framing, and camera movement. The finished sequences carry a rainbow tinted color palette and sparkling highlights meant to convey something genuinely otherworldly. To find a workable practical technique for depicting bullet impacts under the drug's influence, the effects team experimented with blood bags, prosthetics, actual live ammunition, and blasts of compressed air. The version that made the final cut used compressed air to create rippling impact effects on flesh. Garland has said the inspiration partly came from nature documentaries and their use of high speed photography to capture animals like whales or sharks breaching water, where the eye eventually stops registering the animal itself and becomes transfixed by the fine detail of water droplets connecting and separating, an effect he wanted to test on violence itself, pushing the question of whether something like a bullet wound could be rendered so abstractly that it became strangely, disturbingly beautiful. Concept art for the film's overall visual design was contributed by comic artist Jock. Filming principal photography began on the 12th of November 2010 in Cape Town, running for approximately 13 weeks, with an additional 7 weeks of second unit photography layered in alongside it. The production carried a total budget in the 30 to $45 million range. Shooting locations were split between Johannesburg and Cape Town Film Studios, and Dredd holds the distinction of being the very first project ever filmed at that particular studio complex. The crew was drawn primarily from South Africa, supplemented by around 40 crew members brought in from abroad. The decision to base the shoot in South Africa came down to straightforward economics: lower costs for cast and crew than comparable locations in Europe or North America, combined with government incentives that could rebate up to 25% of production costs back to the filmmakers. Dredd was captured digitally and shot primarily in native 3D using Red MX and SI2K cameras for standard photography and Phantom Flex high-speed cameras capable of recording at 400 frames per second, specifically for the slow-mo sequences. Multiple camera rigs were deployed to manage the demands of stereoscopic shooting, and select 2D elements were converted to 3D later during post production rather than captured natively. DNA Films co founder Andrew McDonald brought in cinematographer Anthony Dodd Mantle to lead the shoot, marking Mantle's first time working in the 3D format. The filmmaking team wanted the finished picture to feel raw and visceral, drawing visual inspiration from crime dramas and gangster films rather than conventional science fiction blockbusters. For the passages meant to convey slow-mo's distorting effect on time and perception, Mantle aimed for images that would feel simultaneously beautiful and disorienting, describing his overall goal as landing somewhere between the polished dystopia of Blade Runner and the harsher, more confrontational aesthetic of A Clockwork Orange. Building the film's central location, the towering peach trees housing block and its cavernous atrium proved to be one of the production's toughest practical challenges. The filmmakers were wary of the cost of constructing an enormous custom set from scratch, and location scouting eventually turned up a large three-walled outdoor space that, when lit and filmed at night, could convincingly pass for an interior. One of the film's most technically demanding set pieces, the sequence in which Mama's gang opens fire across the atrium with rotary cannons in an attempt to kill Dredd, required 10 full days of filming spread across 8 different sets, both inside and outside the studio, which were later stitched together seamlessly through visual effects work. Aerial photography of Johannesburg presented its own difficulties. John Thumb was unable to join a scheduled helicopter shoot because of last minute complications with flight permissions, leaving the visual effects team to work with footage that wasn't captured with the film's specific story beats in mind and had to be selectively repurposed in the edit. Mantle, for his part, had to design new camera rigs entirely from scratch in order to achieve certain close up shots the production wanted. Garland maintained a near constant presence on set throughout the shoot, and it became common for Urban to look to him for direction on individual scenes rather than to Travis. The design of Mega City 1 itself went through considerable trial and error. The filmmakers experimented extensively with how the city's tower blocks should be arranged and spaced, discovering early on that packing the buildings tightly together, closer to how they often appear on the comic page, actually made the structures read as smaller on screen rather than more imposing. The solution was to give the buildings more visual breathing room, which had the effect of making individual towers feel larger while also leaving space to suggest roads, traffic, and a wider cityscape extending beyond the edges of the frame. Outcrops and structural appendages were added to break up otherwise straight, uniform lines and give the skyline a rougher, more lived in silhouette. The production also became a genuine industry story in its own right when, on the 7th October 2011, the Los Angeles Times reported that Travis had been barred from taking part in the editing process following disagreements between the director and the film's producers and financing executives. Garland stepped in to oversee editing personally, and his contribution to shaping the final cut was significant enough that the possibility of him seeking a co director credit was seriously discussed. A striking situation given that Garland had never directed a film before and had not been present on set in any directorial capacity during the shoot itself. Reporting at the time indicated the underlying dispute centered on disagreement over the quality and direction of the footage Travis was delivering. Although he was removed from the cutting room, Travis continued to monitor the film's progress from a distance. On the 10th October 2011, Travis and Garland issued a joint statement describing their arrangement as an unconventional collaboration that had been agreed upon before filming even began, confirming that Travis remained involved in the production and clarifying that Garland was not pursuing a co director credit. The matter resurfaced years later in March 2018 when Urban stated publicly that he considered Dredd to effectively be Garland's directorial debut in all but title. Post-production. Much of the film's post-production labor was consumed by the painstaking process of finishing the slow-mo sequences, a task that continued right up until the very end of the schedule. The visual effects team kept tweaking color grading, saturation levels, image framing, and camera motion for these passages long after principal photography wrapped, treating them almost as a separate design problem from the rest of the film. The editorial side of post production was, as described above, unusually turbulent, with Travis sidelined from the cutting room following the October 2011 dispute. Garland assumed a hands on role, shaping the structure and pacing of the finished film, a level of creative control over the edit that went well beyond the writing and producing credits he had signed on for. The elaborate rotary cannon assault sequence, filmed piecemeal across 8 separate sets, also had to be assembled and blended in post so that the geography of the atrium read as a single continuous space. While the Johannesburg aerial footage captured without the specific planning the crew had originally hoped for, had to be selectively edited into the finished film by Thumb's team to serve the story as best it could. Music composer Paul Leonard Morgan was brought on to score Dredd, ultimately delivering a soundtrack built around an industrial music sensibility intended to match the film's grim, futuristic setting. Leonard Morgan initially experimented with a more conventional band based approach to the score, but abandoned it after deciding the results sounded too polished and too safe for the material. He pivoted instead toward electronic composition, layering 1980s style synthesizers together with more modern sound modules and running the results through distortion and other processing effects. He has described his goal as building a score that resisted being pinned to any specific decade, landing somewhere between a modern dance track and a more abstract, evocative soundscape. For the slow mo sequences specifically, Leonard Morgan took an unusual compositional approach. He wrote new passages using real instruments, then slowed the recordings down dramatically to match the on screen visuals. In the most extreme cases, a single second of composed music was stretched out to roughly 10 minutes, played back at around 17% of its original speed, before layering an additional real time score back on top of the slowed track. One of the more unusual anecdotes from the film's scoring process involves an unofficial fan altered Justin Bieber track. Garland has recounted that Portishead instrumentalist Jeff Barrow sent him a link to a Bieber song that had been slowed down roughly 800 times, transforming it into a strange choral, almost trance like piece of music. The unofficial edit was used during editing as a temporary placeholder track for the slow mo sequences before the real score was finished. And Leonard Morgan ultimately recreated a version of that same slowed down choral effect for the finished film, inspired directly by the modified Bieber track that had shaped the editor's expectations during the temp scoring phase. Beyond Leonard Morgan's original score, the finished film also incorporates a handful of licensed tracks from other artists. Poison Lips by the French electronic musician Whitehag, Dubstride credited to Ian McCullough and Gemma Kicks, Snuffbox by the comedian and musician Matt Berry, Pontiac Moon by Robert J. Walsh, and Jubilee Don't Let Nobody Turn You Around by soul singer Bobby Womack. Released theatrical Dredd had its first public screening at San Diego Comic Con on the 11th July 2012, well ahead of its wide theatrical rollout, giving genre audiences and press an early look at the finished film. It went on to screen at the Toronto International Film Festival on the 6th of September, and again later that month at Fantastic Fest, where an exclusive promotional poster designed by comic artist Jock was released through Mondo to mark the film's appearance. The film opened theatrically in the United Kingdom on the 7th September 2012, followed by a broader worldwide release on the 21st September, with South African audiences getting their first chance to see it on the 28th September. The marketing campaign built around the release leaned into the film's dystopian premise in some unusual ways. In August 2012, a viral advertising website called Dredd Report launched as a pointed parody of the real world news aggregator, The Drudge Report, featuring an in universe video decrying the dangers of slow mo, alongside links to fictional news coverage tied to the film's world. A tie in prequel comic was also published to coincide with release, serving as a backstory for Mama. It traces her earlier life as a prostitute controlled by a pimp named Lester Grimes, her relationship with a man named Eric, who is later revealed as the drug's creator, Lester's murder of Eric out of jealousy over the interference with his own business, and Mama's brutal retaliation against Lester before she takes direct control of the slow mo trade herself. The comic was written by Judge Dredd magazine editor Matt Smith and illustrated by 2000 AD artist Henry Flint, releasing on the 5th September 2012. just ahead of the UK theatrical debut. The advertising push does not appear to have gone unnoticed by industry award bodies. The campaign picked up a Golden Trailer Award for Best Thriller TV Spot for a spot titled Big Addicted, alongside nominations across several other categories, including Best Action TV Spot, Most Original TV Spot, Best Graphics in a TV Spot, Best Music TV Spot, and both Best Action Poster and Most Original Poster for the film's striking motion poster. Reporting at the time indicated that distributor Lionsgate committed roughly $25 million toward advertising and print costs for the North American release, a substantial marketing investment that would later become a point of contention once box office results came in. Home Media Dread arrived on DVD, Blu-ray, and digital download on the 8th January 2013 in North America, followed by a UK home media release on the 14th January. The Blu-ray edition packaged together both the 2D and 3D versions of the film alongside a digital copy, and both the DVD and Blu-ray releases included a substantial set of bonus features. 7 featurettes covering topics such as the character's 35-year comic history, the making of the film's visual effects, its 3D production, its weapons and gear, and a behind the scenes look at the Peach Trees set, plus a Dredd motion comic prequel narrated by Urban himself. The home media release performed strongly relative to the film's theatrical showing. During its first week on sale in the UK, Dredd topped both the DVD and Blu-ray sales charts. In North America, it likewise debuted at number 1 across DVD and Blu-ray during its release week, with roughly 650,000 units sold in total, and Blu-ray copies accounting for nearly half of that figure. It was also the best selling digital download of that same period. Sales saw a notable spike in the United Kingdom in June 2013, driven by a rumor circulating that continued consumer demand could influence DNA Films' decision on whether to pursue a sequel. By September 2013, the film's North American home media sales were estimated at roughly $10 million, while in the UK it had spent more than 270 cumulative days within Amazon's top 100 best-selling home media titles. By July 2017, that North American home media sales estimate had climbed to approximately $20 million, a slow burn commercial afterlife that stood in sharp contrast to the film's disappointing theatrical run. That afterlife also fed directly into years of on and off sequel speculation. At the London Film and Comic Con in July 2012, before the film had even opened, Garland suggested that a North American gross exceeding $50 million would make further films viable, and floated the idea of an eventual trilogy, a prospective second film exploring the origins of Dread and Mega City 1, and a third introducing the undead Judge Death and his dark judges. In August 2012, Garland raised the possibility of a Judge Dredd television series as another avenue forward. The following month, he discussed drawing on the origins and democracy comic storylines for any sequel, introducing characters such as Judge Cal and Chopper and exploring the idea of Dredd himself as effectively a fascist figure within his own society. Producer Andrew MacDonald added that any future films would likely again be made in partnership with IM Global and shot in South Africa. That optimism cooled considerably once box office results were in. In March 2013, executive producer R.D. Shankar stated plainly that a sequel was unlikely. 2 months later, Urban struck a more hopeful note, arguing the film had found a genuine audience and that fan enthusiasm could still help resurrect the project. That fan enthusiasm proved real and organized. In April 2013, 2000 AD teased a comic continuation of the story, which materialized later that year as Dredd. Underbelly, published in Judge Dredd magazine issue ISHS 340 on the 18th September 2013. In October 2014, Shankar unveiled an unofficial animated spin-off centered on the Dark Judges, titled Judge Dredd, Super Fiend. All 6 episodes were released on YouTube on the 27th of October 2014. By March 2015, however, Garland was downplaying the odds of a direct sequel happening in the near future, at least with the same creative team attached. The idea refused to die entirely. In 2016, Urban indicated that conversations were underway about a possible continuation for a streaming platform such as Netflix or Amazon Prime, while also acknowledging in a separate interview that the film's mishandled marketing and disappointing box office made a traditional sequel a hard sell, even as its strong performance across every subsequent format strengthened the underlying case for one. In May 2017, a television series titled Judge Dredd Mega 61 was formally announced as being in development through IM Global Television and Rebellion, with Urban confirming that August that he was in discussions to star. That series was ultimately shelved amid the COVID-19 pandemic. Rebellion CEO Jason Kingsley later explained that completed scripts existed and the project was ready to move forward, but that pandemic related disruption to funding and scheduling had stalled it indefinitely. Most recently, in 2025, reports emerged of an entirely new Judge Dredd film in development, this time helmed by director Taika Waititi from a script by Drew Pearce, a fresh chapter in the character's long and complicated screen history. Arriving well over a decade after Dread's original release, reception box office despite the largely favorable notices it would go on to receive, Dread struggled badly at the box office. The film's worldwide theatrical total came to roughly $41.5 million, a disappointing return against a production budget estimated at $30 to $45 million once marketing costs are factored in. Of that total, international markets outside North America contributed around $27.6 million, while North America itself accounted for roughly $13.4 million. The film's commercial performance actually looked strongest close to home. In the United Kingdom, Dredd opened at the top of the box office chart, earning 1.5 million, about $7 million, from 415 cinemas. Notable not just for the number one placement, but because it made Dredd the first film restricted to audiences 18 and over to top the UK chart since Saw 3D had managed the feat back in 2010. That momentum didn't hold. By its second weekend, the film had slipped to fifth place, earning 769,381. Part of the UK shortfall has been attributed to a distribution decision that limited the format the film could be seen in. Dredd was shown primarily in 3D in British cinemas, and the distributor reportedly turned down requests from cinemas for 2D prints, a choice widely seen afterward as having needlessly narrowed the film's potential audience among viewers who preferred to watch in standard 2D. The UK run ultimately generated a total of roughly $6.9 million. North America told an even rockier story. Pre-release tracking had estimated an opening weekend in the 8-10 million range, tempered by the film's adult rating and the lingering poor reputation of the 1995 Stallone adaptation. The actual results came in well below even that modest forecast. Dredd earned just $2 million on its opening day and finished the weekend in sixth place overall with a $6.3 million weekend gross from 506 cinemas, an average of only $2,514 per cinema. Audience data gathered that opening weekend skewed heavily toward an older male crowd, with 69% of ticket buyers over the age of 25 and 75% male. The film's North American theatrical run wrapped on the 1st November 2012 after a 42-day run in cinemas. Outside the UK and North America, the film's strongest individual markets were China, around $4.5 million, Russia, about $4 million, and Australia, roughly $2 million. Karl Urban was notably candid in placing blame for the underwhelming box office squarely on the marketing campaign rather than on the finished film itself, arguing bluntly that audiences essentially had no idea the movie was even being released, and describing the outcome as a failure of marketing rather than filmmaking. Critical response. Critical reaction to Dredd was, on balance, considerably warmer than its box office performance would suggest, beginning with its earliest screenings at San Diego Comic Con in July 2012. On Rotten Tomatoes, the film holds a score of 80% based on 171 reviews, with an average rating of 6.6 out of 10. The site's collected critical consensus frames the film as a violent, effects driven, and self aware take on the material that successfully channels the grittier spirit of its comic book source. Metacritic, which tends to skew more conservative in its aggregation, gave the film a score of 60 out of 100 across 30 critics, characterizing the overall response as mixed to average. Audiences polled by CinemaScore during opening weekend handed the film a B grade on the service's A plus to F scale. A number of reviewers responded particularly well to the film's approach to its central character, with IGN's review specifically praising the film for functioning as a genuine character study rather than a conventional action vehicle. Urban's performance drew consistent praise across multiple outlets, with critics repeatedly singling out his ability to convey a fully realized character despite never removing his helmet or showing his eyes. Entertainment Weekly's Darren Franich enjoyed his gravelly, Eastwood inflected vocal performance, crediting Urban with getting real mileage out of little more than his voice and his chin. IndieWire argued the role let him further establish himself as a genuinely versatile performer capable of turning vocal mimicry into something with real emotional weight, while Variety's Jeff Buckshire felt Urban successfully captured the more mythic, larger than life qualities of a lawman no criminal would want to cross. Thirlby's performance as Anderson also earned substantial attention. Bakshia singled her out as a key source of the film's emotional pull, describing her handling of the tension between a judge's unforgiving duties and a psychic's deeper capacity for compassion as one of the film's real pleasures. The New Statesman's Laura Snedden offered a more thematic reading, noting that the film passes the Bechdel test and largely avoids sexism or misogyny in how it treats its female characters, portraying both Anderson and Mama as fully capable figures who repeatedly outmaneuver men who underestimate them without either woman's characterization being reduced to her gender. Not every critic was won over, and a meaningful cluster of American newspaper reviews landed on the more skeptical end of the spectrum. The Los Angeles Times' Mark Olson dismissed the film as a heavy handed action picture that settles into a repetitive string of confrontations with one bad guy after another. Newsday's Frank Lovesay described it as bleak and unglamorous in a hollow way, arguing that apart from a single believable scene involving Thirlby, the film mostly trades in macho posturing and joyless cynicism. The Star Ledger's Stephen Whitty called it a grim and visually unappealing film that offered little to draw viewers in beyond its drug induced slow motion interludes. The Hollywood Reporter's Stephen Dalton landed somewhere in between, arguing that the dark, distinctly British irony of the original comic strip had largely gone missing from the adaptation, and suggesting that the confined setting, video game like plot structure, and muted sense of humor might disappoint longtime fans of the source material, while also noting that Urban's performance, though close in spirit to the comic, still felt like it was missing something. Even so, Dalton ultimately judged the finished film to be a smart, muscular addition to the science fiction action genre, pitched at a level that could satisfy longtime fans without shutting out newcomers. The film's visual effects and its signature slow motion sequences received some of the most consistent praise of all. Buckshare highlighted the sequences as visually striking, and singled out the film's use of 3D as genuinely well deployed. Empire's Chris Hewitt described the slow-mo visuals as authentically surreal bursts of heightened color that never overstayed their welcome, adding that the film's 3D work, extending even to its opening credits, was frequently excellent and came fully alive during those sequences. Dalton likewise praised the film's constant visual ambition, comparing its gritty aesthetic more to cult genre favorites like District 9 and 28 Days Later than to standard studio comic book fare, and singling out Mantle's first foray into 3D as a striking mix of saturated color, high resolution close up work, and dazzling slow motion photography. That critical enthusiasm for the film's visual craft carried through to awards season. Dredd won the Art of 3D award at the 2013 Empire Awards, alongside nominations that year for Best British Film and Best Science Fiction Fantasy. It also picked up nominations from the IGN Summer Movie Awards for Best Comic Book Adaptation Movie and from the Golden Schmoes Awards across several categories, including Best Sci-Fi Movie of the Year, Biggest Surprise of the Year, Coolest Character of the Year, Most Underrated Movie of the Year, and Trippiest Movie of the Year. Perhaps the most meaningful endorsement came from within the comic's own creative lineage. John Wagner, the character's co-creator, had been openly critical of the 1995 film, but responded warmly to this version, praising it as a genuinely faithful representation of the character, singling out Urban's performance as a fine take on Dredd that he'd be glad to see continued in a follow-up, and crediting Thirlby's work as Anderson as excellent. He described the character work and storyline overall as authentically true to the comic spirit. In the years since its release, Dredd has come to be regarded as something of a cult film, a reputation built steadily through home media success and sustained fan advocacy rather than through its initial theatrical run. Some critics did note similarities between Dredd and The Raid, Redemption, another action film built around a near identical premise of law enforcement officers trapped inside a single high rise building. Released just months earlier, comparisons that led some reviewers to characterize Dredd as derivative. Both Garland and Urban pushed back on that framing, pointing out that the production timelines of the two films made any direct influence or plagiarism effectively impossible.